What's the most terrifying moment you've experienced that felt like a scene out of a thriller or a horror movie? Two things happened, both within a few days of each other. I had never had any creepy experiences before or since. In June 2019, I went to New York and then on to St. Lucia for my 30th birthday. We had not actually planned to go to St. Lucia, but we did not like New York and decided to go somewhere else with a reasonable flight time and ticket price. The night before our early flight from JFK to St. Lucia, my husband and I checked into a budget, Travelodge-style hotel that offered a shuttle service to the airport. The moment I walked into our room, I got the strangest feeling about the hotel. Something felt off. With little to do and an early start ahead of us, I brushed my teeth and got ready for bed soon after arriving. That is when I noticed my new glasses, which I had bought earlier that day, were missing from my bedside table, a few. White t-shirts my husband had bought from H&M that day were also gone. We were completely perplexed, but eventually had to stop searching and get some sleep. Some hours later, at about 3 a.m., I was lying on my side when what felt like someone's finger traced down my spine, making me jump. The room felt deeply sinister, as if a dark cloud hung over it. I turned to see if it was my husband, but he was on his side with his back to me, fast asleep. I was so on edge that I lay there for about 10 minutes, too scared to move. Then, out of nowhere, in the pitch-black room, my husband said, "Are you okay?" I was shocked that he even knew I was awake and asked why he had said that. He told me he had just had a strange dream in which I was running in terror, and an old woman was trying to grab me with her hands as I ran past. The following day, we arrived in St. Lucia, and everything was fine in our hilltop Airbnb for a few days. One night, though, I decided to read my book in one of the bedrooms, the one with the large, beautiful four-poster bed. Within minutes, and completely out of nowhere, I became overwhelmingly drowsy, and I do not remember much after that. I woke up sometime later to my husband standing by the bed, looking confused. There had been a 3-hour electricity blackout on that side of the island. He had walked into the room, using his phone as a light to check on me, because he expected me to shout for him and be frightened. Instead, he found me fast asleep on the bed with the lamp beside me still switched on. He tried the other lights in the room, but nothing worked. Nowhere else in the house had power. He kept checking on me, but I was completely out of it. The moment the electricity came back on, I woke up instantly, as if someone had pressed an on button. It felt as though I had been knocked unconscious from the second the blackout began until moments after it ended. Funnily enough, St. Lucia itself felt very dark to me, despite being such a popular island for honeymoons and weddings. 2 months later, my neighbor's husband died, on the island in a freak accident as well. As for the electricity incident, my husband describes it as a positive experience, as if I was being protected, which is a comforting interpretation. I am not entirely sure how I feel about it, though. Story 2. I was about 20 at the time and was back home from college on a visit. My friend Ian and I were having a few drinks and entertaining 2 girls we knew from high school. As 2 romantic hopefuls not quite old enough to go to the bar, we opted to go drink at a secluded beach we knew of. To get to Sade Beach required walking through a thick forested area, and despite it being dark, everyone seemed fine with the idea. We headed on over and began our trek, something we had done without incident several times. However, this time we immediately realized something was off. There were no frogs or bugs. The forest was silent. Absolutely nothing but a calm stillness. Ian and I quietly mentioned to each other that this usually meant a predator was around, but we had had a few at this point and decided we were probably the scariest thing out there. We continued down the path quietly, but on a slightly heightened alert. Then we noticed the smell. The forest smelled off, almost like a mixture of dirty clothes and bad breath. Again, we were concerned, but at this point we were almost there, so there was no sense in turning back. The last part of the path cut through a marsh lowland that connected the barrier island to the mainland. It is admittedly creepy as hell, with old winding trees covering the path. What little light we had from the moon was now being blotted out by a twisted latticework of branches. We began to traverse this path, and were about midway through when I heard it. A pronounced mechanical click, like a Snapple bottle cap being popped. Ian and I froze, and before we could localize where the noise came from, we heard it again from a different direction. There was a brief pause, and then the forest simply stood up. A dozen figures, vaguely silhouetted by moonlight, stood and began to move towards us from all directions. Without hesitation, Ian took off in a full sprint. I went to follow, but pulled back after deciding I could not leave the girls alone to be murdered. As they realized what was happening, they began to scream, the kind of scream you only let out when you are absolutely sure you are screwed. As I grabbed them to get them positioned to run, I turned and the path was now blocked by obscured figures. It was game over, no way out, hopelessly outnumbered by figures that did not even appear to be human. I kept the girls behind me and got ready to make my last stand. I was terrified, but the adrenaline rush kept me calm. The figure closest to us ceased its advance. An arm reached up from its center mass and pulled off a helmet that had foliage strapped to it, revealing a man's painted face. He began to speak as I stood before him in utter disbelief. He identified himself as an officer of the Marine Corps and explained they sometimes run war games on this stretch of land, which I learned is public access but owned by the Navy. They were unsure if we were part of the exercise or not, hence why they advanced. He began to apologize profusely, but I was so relieved to be alive at this point, I could not have cared less. As they escorted us back, all the weirdness of the woods began to make sense. The silence, the smell, those clicks, all a result of a platoon of leathernecks creeping in the shadows. On our path back, several other smaller groups that had stayed in cover made themselves known, including a pair that had stopped Ian's dumb A from running all the way back to Baltimore. Needless to say, the trip back home was awkward, and the girls were quite unhappy with Ian's reaction, and us, with the help of the Marine Corps, accidentally traumatizing them. Up until that officer removed his helmet, I truly believed we were in the midst of a horror movie. Story 3. I never used to believe in cryptids. I heard stories about them and thought they were cool, but I always told myself, there's no way. A few months ago, my boyfriend and I took my dog outside to use the bathroom. It was probably around 2 or 3 in the morning, and we were both having trouble sleeping, so we decided to smoke on my back porch. After being outside for about 5 or 10 minutes, out of nowhere, it got super cold. All of the crickets stopped chirping, and the early morning birds followed suit. The only noise was the wind blowing in the trees. Suddenly there came what can only be described as a barking noise about 60 feet from my house. It was quiet at first, but it didn't take long before we could both hear it without straining our ears. It got louder, but I couldn't see the source of the noise because of obstacles blocking my view in that direction. It just kept repeating the same sound over and over, like a recording, about every 15 seconds. It sounded the same every time, and that's what made my hair stand on end. My neighbors have dogs, but they are all Chihuahuas and Yorkies. Even if they were big dogs, I don't think this was a big dog. I don't know what it was, but it sounded fake. I don't know, it's hard to explain. You just had to be there. My boyfriend and I got too creeped out and put out what we were smoking, called in my dog, and went to bed. The same thing happened the next night. We couldn't sleep again, so we took my dog out around the same time as the night before. The noise started up almost immediately. It was faster this time, and somewhat louder, but it stayed the same the entire time we were out. Maybe we were feeling brave, or maybe we were stupid, not mutually exclusive, but we stayed out longer. Nothing happened, which I am grateful for. After a little while, though, the noise stopped. My boyfriend and I wondered what it could have been, but there were no theories other than something scary. We went 2 nights without the noise, to our relief, but on the 3rd it came back. For whatever reason, with a vengeance. My boyfriend was just standing on my porch whistling a tune when it started again. It was louder than ever. Before, there had been 10 to 15 second intervals between the barks, but now there were none. It was just barking constantly. It was still the same old recording, just louder and more aggressive. We went inside immediately. Skipping forward, it has been about a month since I last heard the noise. Before then, it decreased in frequency, going from happening every night to roughly 4 nights a week, then 2 nights a week, and then gone. My boyfriend and I were so invested in this that we acted like a couple of little idiots and investigated where the noise was coming from, but only in the daytime, of course. There was nothing there, no nest or anything, just dirt like everything else. I never found out what it was, and though I am very curious, a large part of me also does not really want to know out of fear. Story 4. I have been a cop for 12 years, and this happened around year 2 or 3. We got a call for a lost child who could not be found at a local Halloween festival at a church. My partner and I decided to check the surrounding neighborhood, since there were already enough officers searching the festival grounds. It was the beginning of graveyard shift, around 9:30 to 10 o'clock at night. As we were checking the neighborhood, a small, dilapidated house with a blanket for a front door caught my attention. I noticed an eerie orange glow coming from inside. When I say house, it looked more like a small shack than a real house. My partner and I decided to check inside to make sure the girl had not wandered in. We announced our presence and got no answer, since there was no front door and the objective was the safety of the child. We entered the shack. Right away, it was clear the place had no electricity. That eerie glow came from dozens of glass religious candles, lighting every room and hallway. As we walked from room to room, looking for anyone or the child, we kept hearing a constant crunching under our feet. The whole time we were there, it felt like we had stepped into another world. The evil, surreal feeling was palpable and stomach-turning. We both felt like we did not belong there. After finding nothing but empty rooms full of candles, I pointed my flashlight at the floor. We realized the crunching was coming from thousands of cockroaches squirming all over the ground. The floor looked like it was moving, alive with insects. My partner and I looked at each other and decided to get out of there. We kept searching the neighborhood until officers at the festival radioed that the girl had been found. Later that night, after my shift ended, I kept replaying the whole thing in my head. Something about that place felt wrong. The amount of roaches was like something out of a horror movie, and the whole scene felt surreal. The next day I went back to the neighborhood in daylight, but could not find the shack anywhere, as if it never existed. I asked my partner if he felt the same way, and he told me he had also gone back and could not find it. He said it had kept him up all night. To this day, that is the closest thing to the paranormal or high strangeness I have experienced in my career, and it still bothers me. Story 5. This past September, my family and I went on vacation to a small island in North Carolina. We had visited and stayed on this island many times throughout my childhood and teen years, so I was very familiar with it and was excited to be back after not having been there for over a decade. One night, my family and I were hanging out on the back porch having some drinks and talking late into the night. Just as everyone was cleaning up and getting ready to head to bed, I happened to walk outside and noticed how incredible the stars were. I live in the suburbs outside of a big city, so I can see about 20 stars on a good night, but the entire sky here was filled with them. I called to my sister, and we both stood in awe as everyone else went to bed. That was when we decided we wanted to hop on our bikes and go for a late-night ride. I am 28 and my sister is 36, but something about sneaking out of the house without telling anyone made us both feel like teenagers again. We rode off down the island laughing and looking up at the stars, before deciding to stop at the opposite end of the island and just enjoy the view and talk for a while. It was empty and quiet on the island as it was almost 4 a.m. We had not seen another person the entire time. We finally decided to start biking back, and we were not really talking much anymore as we focused on heading home. We started rounding a bend and getting closer to our house when I saw up ahead, under the only streetlight on the road, a man standing by himself on the side of the street. Before I could even process what I was seeing, he started walking toward the middle of the road and stopped dead center, staring at us as we approached. My sister was a little bit ahead of me, so I tried to warn her without being too loud, but she just responded, "Huh? I do not see anyone." I was watching her, and I biked closer and felt my heart racing, so I repeated myself again, but she still did not process that I was scared, so I yelled at her, and she finally stopped. We were about 20 feet away from the guy, and I was telling my sister that I was freaked out by this man in the middle of the street up ahead and did not know what to do, and that was when I saw him slowly walk back toward the edge of the street and disappear out of view. In a panic, I made the quick decision to just pedal for my life past where he had been and get home. However, as I went past the spot in the road where he was, I looked over and did not see anyone at all. I still have no idea where he could have gone. We made it home safe, and it has been a funny story to tell people, but I still have no clue what that man was doing, or what his intentions were on that empty island at 4 a.m. Story 6. My wife and I had checked into a hotel room and had gone to bed. My wife was asleep. I was just starting to drift off to sleep when I heard a soft voice in the dark room, just above a whisper, say, "I think they're asleep now." Thinking I had just heard the voice of someone hiding in our room, I jumped out of bed in terror, turned on all the lights, searched the bathroom, shower, under the bed, the closet, but there was nothing. My wife and I were the only two people in the room. Now, some people might have believed the room was haunted, but what I experienced was a hypnagogic hallucination, though for a few minutes there, I was quite terrified. Story 7. I was falling asleep staring at the ceiling. We had a few night lights in the room, so we didn't die when we got up to pee during the night. The nightlight was casting a weird shadow on the ceiling that looked oddly like the profile of a face, and the more my brain and eyes focused on it, the more detailed and menacing it began to look. I was completely fixated on this face, and then suddenly it turned to look at me. I screamed and thrashed around in my blankets, waking my highly irritated partner, who was yelling, "What? What?" at this point. My brain then realized that the shadow was created by the blanket and my partner's foot, and when they moved their foot, it made it appear as if the face had turned to look at me. I was so embarrassed that I told my partner I had a nightmare and turned over and went to sleep. Story 8. Years ago, I was living in my first solo apartment. No roommate, just me. I was excited for Christmas that year and decorated. My apartment really cute. I had a nativity set that my mom had designed and made for me, and I loved it. I set it up on the floor in front of my tree. At the last minute, I was able to fly home for the holiday and spend it with my parents in a different state. A few days after I returned, I had a knock at my front door. I opened it to find a man and his wife, who appeared to be in their mid-50s, and they seemed very surprised to see me. They asked if Larry was there. I told them I did not know anyone named Larry. They insisted he was their son and that he lived in this apartment. I assured them that this was my place and that no one named Larry lived there. They said they had spent Christmas Day with Larry in this apartment, then pointed to where my tree had been and asked what I had done with the beautiful custom-made nativity that had been there. They loved it, and Larry had told his mother she could have it. I had several odd things happen in that apartment, but I was young and did not have good sense, so I did not move for 3 years. Story 9. Compared to a lot of these, this will sound really tame. I was driving home very late at night down a narrow country lane. It was a typical UK winter night, so really dark, rainy, and windy. On the lane was a small stone humpback bridge, the kind that is so steep you cannot see over the other side. I slowed and began to cross the bridge, and in my headlights I saw hundreds of mice rushing across the road from right to left across the bridge. This was impossible, as the bridge is raised over a stream with solid stone walls on either side. I gasped and hit the brakes, coming to a stop in the middle of the bridge, and in the next sweep of the wipers I saw nothing. Just some leaves blowing in the wind. I know it sounds really mild, but I have remembered this vividly for over 10 years now, and I was so freaked out at the time. Story 10. I woke up from a coma in hospital. I was completely paralyzed, and my vocal cords were damaged, so I could not speak at all. I was in intense pain. I was put on ketamine, but no one told me, so I could not understand why I was hallucinating. I saw truly terrifying things. I believed I was strapped to the bed in some kind of illegal experimentation center. The nurses were covered in blood, and the doctors wore masks and screamed at the top of their voices. I cried constantly, and the nurses tried to figure out why. I was desperately trying to ask them not to hurt me, but I had no voice. This went on for a week until I was taken off the ketamine. It has been 12 years, and I still have nightmares. I will never touch a hallucinogenic drug again, as I have been told you can get flashbacks to past experiences. I will never go back there. Every time I get ill, I am terrified of falling into another coma and refuse to call an ambulance, even in the most dire situations. I genuinely thought I was in a horror film. It was utterly terrifying. Story 11. I was driving from the local airport. My wife is a pilot one evening with my future wife. It was about 9 p.m. The road took us by a pull-off where some county dumpsters were on one side of the road. As we drove by, a blacked-out car that had been parked spun out on the gravel and got right behind me doing the speed limit. I mean, he was so close in the rear view, I could only see the tint on his windshield, not even his car's hood. It was not a police car. It was an early 2000 Chevy. He was following us. I took some random turns using my blinker, thinking at first he was just going the same way as me, and wanted me to hurry up on the one-lane road with a double yellow. But after about 3 random turns that kept us in the same area, I realized it was not random. I told my wife to hold on to something and aggressively turned down a side road with my blinker indicating another way. I sped 90 down a road with a much lower speed than that, took a few extra turns, and ended up parking in the airport parking lot. I turned off my lights and we waited. The same car came barreling down the road I was just on. We watched him go around a bend out of sight, and then took off hauling in the opposite direction with my lights off, using the moonlight to see. Once I got close to a main road, I flicked the lights on and drove under the speed limit the rest of the way home. It freaked us both out so much. We almost called the cops and parked at the police station so they could pull him over instantly. No idea what they were doing, but we did not play games with that crap. Story 12. I was babysitting and the kids were asleep upstairs. The only lights on in the house were 3 table lamps in the living room where I was doing homework. The phone rang. This was the 80s, so I answered the landline. I heard a dial tone, but the phone kept ringing after I answered it. I fiddled with the phone, and it eventually stopped ringing but still had the dial tone. This happened. Twice. I kept doing homework. All at once, all 3 table lamps turned off. They would not turn back on. There was no overhead light in that room. Now the house was completely dark. Then a huge noise came from the far side of the house. It sounded like the furnace was dying, or they had a captive wild animal. I bounded up the stairs and turned on the hallway light. I sat in the hallway outside the kids' bedrooms until the parents came home. I was too scared to go into the kitchen and use the one phone to call someone. The parents explained everything when they returned. 1, they had a dual-line phone. There was a tiny switch on the side of the phone. If I had flipped it, I would have been able to answer the line that was ringing. 2, all the table lamps in the living room were on timers, so they would get turned off in the evening to save electricity. 3, the noise was their hot water radiator heating system. Apparently the pipes make that sound when the system turns itself on. I suggested they tell future babysitters about these things. Story 13. When I was an 11 to 12-year-old girl, I was competing in a pony club show and had forgotten a piece of riding equipment in my instructor's truck. She held my pony and I ran back to her truck, down a small dirt road to the parking area. The parking lot was almost vacant because all the people and ponies were near the riding ring, except for one random guy who was just hanging out there by his car. He asked me if I had my driver's license, to which I responded that I did not because I was a kid. He then told me his car was stuck in the mud and asked if I would get in it to drive while he pushed. I declined and started walking back toward the riding ring. He drove away in his car with no issues. Story 14. When I was living in my parents' house, my bedroom had this closet that sat directly opposite my bed. For whatever reason I cannot remember, the door could not close. That closet had always given me bad vibes, and I almost never slept. But the worst was one night when I was home alone. I was lying in bed trying to sleep when suddenly it got eerily quiet. I was home alone, but I could typically hear nighttime sounds coming from outside. As I lay there trying to rationalize it, I started to hear some whispering. At first I could not make it out, but then I recognized it as my name. Obviously freaked out, I was nearly paralyzed with fear. I sat there for what felt like forever, when I felt what seemed like a thin finger slowly tracing down my foot from toes to heel. The rest of that night is honestly a blur, but I remember having this super strong urge to look into the closet. I am happy I never did. Story 15. So, I was dating a girl in my early 20s. We went on a road trip to California when she started displaying symptoms of schizophrenia. She would be completely normal all day, and then suddenly just shift in vibe. One night, I was with her, and we were staying alone in a little building on a farm while doing a work trade. She was having a normal conversation with me when all of a sudden, she froze and stared past me with a terrified look on her face. "It's right behind you." "Yeah, screw that." I was so scared. I looked behind me, found nothing, and asked her what she saw. She did not explain, then started saying bad things about herself and spiraling more and more negatively with her thoughts. Then her pupils widened in an instant, like she had just gotten eye drops. I noticed she went to grab a knife off the side table. I quickly grabbed her wrist, the hand with the knife, and wrestled her down to the ground. I eventually got the knife from her without her being able to do anything with it. The craziest part was how strong this person was. I probably had 60 pounds on this 110-pound girl, and she was putting up a hell of a fight trying to keep the knife. Man, that was a road trip from hell. Story 16, I was with my boyfriend's family on a trip somewhere in Alabama. We took a jet ski to a waterfall, very romantic, yada yada. But to get close to the waterfall, we had to get off the jet ski and climb over quite a bit of slippery rocks. On the way back, I did not think I could make it without falling, so I decided to try to go around the rocks instead. It was longer, but looked maybe less dangerous. I was wading through a shallow pool and I saw something. About 10 feet ahead on a flat rock sticking out of the water was a perfectly white, picked clean deer skull staring at me. Creepy, but not unbelievable because there are a lot of deer in that area. Then I looked down in the water. It appeared to be standing up. A headless deer body, not picked clean like the skull, still covered with its fur. No visible blood in the water, just standing, swaying ever so gently with the movement of the water. I noped the hell out of there and took my chances with the slippery rocks. Story 17. I was part of a small drum corps in Texas back in '06. We were on tour and got around in 3 15-passenger vans. This was before Google Maps, and our driver had a set of directions from MapQuest. One night, we were on a small 2-lane highway in central Texas. It was 2 a.m. The next thing we knew, we were no longer on a highway. We were on a dirt road, and the driver was not sure how we got there in the first place. We ended up pulling into a trailer town. It was very dark. The town, if you could call it that, was a couple square blocks of trailers and campers and one brick 2-story building that looked like a convenience store. There was only one light on, and it was the mosquito control light inside the brick building. We started noticing eyes looking at us in every direction, glowing red and orange, hundreds of pairs of eyes. We were genuinely freaked out. The driver popped on the high beams, and we realized the entire town was covered in live deer. I mean hundreds of deer. They were on top of cars, on top of campers, in yards, on the side streets, and lining the side of the dirt road we were on. Not a single one moved, not an ear wiggle, not a ground scratch, nothing. They just stared at us. The only time they moved was to turn their heads to keep looking at our vans as we slowly, very slowly, drove past. There were no people, no other lights aside from that mosquito trap and our headlights. Despite deer being on top of trailers and in truck beds and on top of sedans, not a single person was awake in this trailer park. I still think about that night. I thought I dreamed it, but friends from back then remember it. We used to joke that the deer were actually the residents of the town, and at night they transform into ungulates. It was just uncanny, unreal. I have never seen anything close to that again. We drove through just fine and ended up back in civilization, but we could never explain what we saw or why there were so many freaking live deer in that trailer park. Story 18. When I was in college, I went on a biology trip to Zambia. Toward the end of the trip, we stayed in a nice resort-like area as a treat, since we had been in tents the entire time up to that, so cabins were a real treat. Anyway, there was one cabin that had electricity, so we all had to plug anything that needed charging in there and leave it. A friend of mine and I were in the same cabin, and later at night our phones were dying, so we went to the cabin to plug them in. There was an armed guard, I am talking an army man, with an AK-47 standing by the entrance. We assumed he was there to prevent things from being stolen, but later learned there was probably another reason. I had this feeling like we were being watched, super strong and super creepy. It was mostly dark, and I kept shining my flashlight in the bush to see if anything was there, and I never saw anything. I figured I was just paranoid. We ran back to our cabin. We were so freaked out and fell asleep for the night. The next morning, we were all at breakfast and everyone was asking if we heard the lion pride that came through camp. I was devastated that I did not, because lions were one of the main wildlife I wanted to see. My friend and I said that we must have slept through it and asked when they came through. This is where it gets scary. The pride came through our camp mere minutes after we went to plug in our phones, and they walked directly behind our cabin. We went to look at the prints, and sure enough, we could have reached out and pet them. That is when I looked at my friend and reminded her of my feeling of being watched. We have no proof, but to this day we are pretty sure at least one of those lions was watching us that night. That was also when I realized the AK was not just for burglars. It still gives me chills to this day, almost 10 years later. Story 19. I was at a friend's house to watch The Ring for the first time. We were 14-year-old girls, alone in her bedroom, with all the curtains shut and the lights off for the atmosphere. We were about halfway through the movie when they replayed the video from start to end. As soon as the video ended in the movie, my friend's house phone rang. We just looked at each other, mildly terrified, like, what the hell? We paused the movie, and my friend answered the phone, but there was nothing but white noise on the other end. She hung up, and we were freaking out a little at this point, but reassured ourselves that it was all fine and pressed OK on the movie again. As soon as we pressed OK, the phone rang again. My friend answered it, and again it was a lot of white noise, but this time we heard a very faint, hoarse and broken up. I'm coming now." Well, now we were absolutely frigging terrified, thinking that the ring was actually coming to get us. Just as we were trying to reassure each other, her front door, which had been locked, slammed open. We peered around the corner and down the stairs, but there was nobody there. We crept down and closed the door, then went into her living room to see if someone had come in the house. The door slammed open again, and no one was there. At this point, we were just staring at the entrance to the living room, waiting for an axe murderer or creepy well girl to come kill us. That's when my friend's dad walked in with arms full of shopping, going, "Come on, I rang and told you I was coming with shopping so you could help me unload the car. What's wrong? You look really pale." Turns out his phone signal had been absolutely awful, and it was just a coincidence when he called. Then he got home, flung open the front door, and immediately gone round the corner to the car, the driveway being on the side of the house so we couldn't see it. When he saw us close the door, he rolled his eyes and flung it open again. Now it's a fun anecdote for us to laugh at, but at the time, we genuinely thought a girl was going to crawl out of the TV. Story 20. Driving to Kansas to see my then girlfriend's father. It was storming badly, and our route ahead was blocked by a major flood. We checked the map and found some back roads that could possibly get us over the river. We were heading down one of these back roads, approaching what should have been a bridge. We stopped. It was completely dark, and we couldn't really see anything at all. We were debating what to do when there was a really long flash of lightning that revealed the bridge ahead was completely submerged in water. There were major drop-offs on either side of the road, and all around us was water. It looked like we were about to drive directly into a lake. We put it in reverse and got out of there. It felt like something from a movie. Story 21. I grew up near the Colonial Parkway, where the still unsolved Parkway murders took place in the 1980s. My mom had a really good friend at the time named Becky, who used to babysit my sister and me. She and her girlfriend Kathy were the first known victims. It was horrible for my mom, and definitely affected the way she raised us. She went from being this carefree hippie who loved to reminisce about her hitchhiking days to being paranoid, morbid, and overprotective to a fault. The Parkway murderer was a shadow over my childhood. It seemed like he could be anywhere, anyone in town. There were locals who ended up on the suspect list from time to time, but were eventually cleared, including a teacher at my high school who had a very real reputation for being inappropriate with female students. Right after my best friend got her driver's license, we took her mom's car for a Saturday morning spin on the Parkway. It's a beautiful and somewhat isolated stretch of land, with turnoffs every few miles for access to the brackish rivers in the area. We parked at an empty turnoff and took her dog Cleo for a walk along the riverbank. We had been strolling for about 15 minutes or so when we came across an unassuming-looking middle-aged guy gazing out at the water. Cleo was an absolute dingbat of a lab mutt. Her family used to joke that she would welcome a burglar with open paws. But when she saw this man, she lost her crap and began growling and snapping. We apologized and were going to continue on our way, but felt uneasy and, without discussing it, just turned back for the parking lot. We didn't see him the whole walk, even though we kept looking behind us, but Cleo's hackles were raised and she wouldn't stop growling. When we got to the car, there was a truck parked next to it. The same man was in the driver's seat, just sitting there. Cleo gave him a piece of her mind while we hightailed it out of there. We both still wonder if her dumb A-dog saved us from a serial killer. We also regret not taking a plate number and reporting it. We never told my mom. She would not have been impressed. Story 22. I was about 12 or 13 years old. One evening I was walking to my psychiatrist for my weekly appointment. It was a half-hour walk and after dark. I enjoyed walking, especially after dark when things were quiet, peaceful, and slow, and there was no one else around. I did not live in a dangerous neighborhood, nor did my walk take me through any dangerous areas. As I was about halfway to my destination, a car, a Cadillac, came driving down the street. Some people, both male and female, in the car were sticking themselves halfway out the windows and taunting and jeering at me as they drove by. It was a bunch of people in their late teens or early 20s, and the driver alone had to be at least 18 years old. I ignored them and kept on walking. About a minute or two later, the same car came down the street again, and those people were jeering at me again. I did not know who they were. Maybe they lived in the neighborhood. I still ignored them and kept walking. Another minute or so went by, and again they came driving down the street, taunting and jeering me. Now I was worried. They were circling the block over and over, deliberately focusing on me. As soon as they reached the corner and made their turn and were out of sight, I ducked behind some bushes in someone's front yard and waited. The car came down the street again. This time, not seeing me walking, they were not jeering. They passed right by me in my hiding place and turned the corner. I thought they believed I had finally reached my destination, one of the houses on the block, and gone inside, and that as a result, they had driven away. I was wrong. Stupidly, I left my hiding place and went back to walking toward my psychiatrist. I should have stayed there behind those bushes much longer because I heard the car approaching. They spotted me and started taunting me again, then turned the corner. This time, I ran toward my destination, but I knew I would not get far before the car and those kids caught up with me again. So I decided to hide again behind the bushes in front of an apartment building, this time resolving to stay there for good, until the jerks in the car gave up searching for me. I had not been hiding there long, maybe about 30 seconds, when the guy whose apartment it was came out, asking what I was doing hiding in his bushes. At first he probably thought I was a burglar, or someone using his bushes as a toilet. Whatever he thought, I explained that I was walking to my psychiatrist and was being followed and harassed by a bunch of kids in a car, which was why I was hiding. The guy could instantly tell from the tone of my voice and my facial expression that I was telling the truth. He could see how scared I was. Just then, the car came down the street and pulled right up to the curb directly in front of us. They looked at me and the guy I was with. He was not a mean-looking guy, in his late 30s to early 40s, but tough and serious-looking enough. He was not wearing a shirt, just a sleeveless undershirt, which showed that his upper body was well-toned, slightly muscular, and had no fat. I looked at the car and realized it did not seem so full now. It was missing a few people. The guy I was with just gave them a hard stare. He asked me, "You know them?" I replied that no, I did not know them at all and had no idea who they were. Just then, as the car was sitting there, about 3 of them approached on foot from the other direction. The car had been traveling from east to west, and those 3 were walking from west to east. That was why the car had seemed less full. They were trying to escalate the situation. They were not satisfied with just driving by and taunting me, so they changed tactics. A few of them had gotten out of the car up ahead and started walking toward me, while the ones still in the car took another turn around the block. Their plan was to trap me between themselves and the car, maybe grab me and drag me into it for whatever reason, probably just for kicks. But when they saw my tough-looking guardian angel with me, the kids walking toward us turned back, got into the car, and it took off. The guy offered to stay with me a little longer, or, if I wanted, to duck into his apartment until I was sure it was safe to continue. I had a feeling that was the last I would see of those guys in their car, and I did not want to be late for my appointment, so I thanked him, but declined, and headed on my way. He went back into his apartment and closed the door. I looked at the closed door and hoped I had not made a mistake by turning down his offer of better safety, because I was still scared. Thankfully, I was right about not seeing the car again. The rest of my walk was uneventful. I reached my psychiatrist's office and told my therapist what had happened. He insisted on calling the police, and they came and took a report. That was the last I heard of it. On my way back home, I usually took the same route, but that evening I changed it, using different streets. I never saw that car or those jerks again. Story 23. I was at a big state fair with my 1- and 3-year-old. My 3-year-old handed me her water to put in the stroller. I took about 3 steps and turned around, and she was gone. After about 15 to 20 seconds, I went fully frantic. We were in a large tented area, and I was screaming her name, running around like a lunatic. My parents were helping look for her too. I decided to check the far corner of the area, and there she was, walking away with a dirty older woman. I ran up to them and firmly grabbed my daughter from her. She said, "What's wrong? We were walking to security." It still haunts me. She was gone for 60 seconds at most. I do not know how long she was with that woman, but it could not have been more than 30 seconds, and she was already walking away. I think about it almost daily. Story 24. I had a stalker when I was a teenager. Not as creepy as some of the stories I have read here. Already, one of the creepier incidents happened when I was up late, around 2 in the morning, on my computer. I did not have the blinds all the way shut, but there were bushes in front of the window. The doorbell rang, and my parents did not wake up. To wake them, I had to walk past the front door and the windows and go up the stairs, which I remember being especially creepy. They just told me to go to bed, so I did. The next morning, my dad found a pile of cigarette butts in the bushes outside the window where I had been sitting. There were also things like tapping on the windows and seeing someone running through the woods in the backyard. But everything stopped when I moved to college. Story 25. I was about 11 at the time. My bedroom was right next to the bathroom. Old house, thin walls. I woke up during the night, nothing unusual, rolled over to go back to sleep. That's when I heard it. It was a kind of soft scratching noise. I lay there for a minute, kind of awake, half, asleep, so I wasn't sure I'd actually heard anything. Then I heard it again, soft, but definitely there, scratching. This time I sat up in the bed, sure I'd heard a sound that was coming from inside the house. It felt like forever, sitting upright in the bed, frozen, trying not to breathe too loud. Scratch, scratch, scratch. By now I could tell it was coming from the bathroom. I'm not sure what possessed me, but instead of getting the F out and going to my mom's room, I got my t-ball bat from under the bed and decided I needed to go confront whatever demon was in my bathroom. As I crept toward the open bathroom door, I could hear the scratching. It was louder now, more aggressive. I stood in the doorway and flicked the light switch on. I stood there, staring into the empty bathroom as my eyes adjusted to the light. I couldn't see anything. The room was empty. That's when the closed shower curtain started to move, along with more aggressive scratching. I stood, there in disbelief. Was this really happening? Is this how I die? Armed with my bat, I crept forward toward the shower. I remember my heart thumping so hard, petrified, as I crept closer. The shower curtain started moving again. Scratch, scratch. I held up my bat with one hand, ready to swing, pulled back the curtain in a swift move to find my cat in the bathtub. She had taken a dump in the plug hole and was digging at the curtain to cover it up. Story 26. When I was a teenager and my folks were out for the night, I went into the kitchen around 10 in the evening just to get myself a drink of water. Suddenly, I got a very nasty chill down my spine that almost made me curl backward. Then came the noise from outside. It sounded like a cat screeching from the bushes, or even the squealing of tall trees brushing against each other in a forest during a strong wind. But it just didn't seem right, as though it were a good distance away at the same time. Keep in mind, the house I was staying in had trees that stood just over a one-floor house only about 30 feet away, but this seemed to come from about a mile off. It turns out that while I could hear it, my sisters couldn't. But my cousins heard it as well, despite the fact that they were all about a good 5 miles away in a different village. The next morning, my mom got a call from her sister about it, when both of them were interrupted by another sibling of theirs. It turned out that a great aunt of mine had a heart attack and passed away in her sleep. That is what convinced me that I heard a banshee that night. Story 27. For reference, I'm a 25-year-old woman and English. I'm a journalist and I go on press trips, which are organized by big tech companies. And they pay for me to do everything. Literally every single trip has everything sorted out, including transfers from the airport, usually a chauffeur and all that. This one woman approached me on LinkedIn, which should have been the first red flag. She said she worked very closely with the journalist who I replaced. We had a crossover of about a week, and he did do a trip with this company, so it seemed like it checked out. She then asked me if I'd booked my flights, and I said sorry, usually the companies pre-arrange that. She said no problem, they would do it. Usually I get loads of contact details for all the PR people, check-ins, the chauffeur company, and so on. But this time I received no details except my flight and hotel. I asked more about the transfer at the airport that day, and she said that due to a strike in Belgium, she'd canceled all transfers and to just get an Uber. It seemed weird. How is that related? Was she just not going to tell me when I landed at 11:30 at night? Then I checked the Uber, and it was 199 euros, which I can't afford, and frankly shouldn't have to. And to be honest, they shouldn't be expecting a female journalist to just get an Uber in a foreign country at midnight anyway. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's just how these trips are done. It all started seeming really, really strange, and I hadn't had any contact with anyone else in the company, so I reached out to the former journalist, who told me, I can honestly say I've never heard of or spoken to her. That was the final red flag, since that was what she based the whole thing on. It didn't help that my pre-trip fun fact about Malaga was that it's only about 30 miles from Morocco or Algeria either, and those areas have higher crime rates than what I'm personally used to. I also checked with the official company, and there was no event on their website. I got the first flight home instead and reached out to the woman, just in case I was being dramatic or paranoid. explaining that this had made me feel unsafe. She dismissed it all and asked if I wanted to meet up for drinks to make up for it. I said I had returned home. She never replied, and now she has blocked me. Story 28. I went to a college in a very beautiful area where there was a lot of camping and hiking. My boyfriend at the time and I would go camping often to get alone time. We would frequently go to a really beautiful but isolated spot that wasn't part of an authorized campground. It could be reached by car, but you had to know where you were going to get there. One time we had planned to go camping, but because I had to work late, he went out early to the area to set up our tent and make camp. After I got off work, he picked me up and we headed out. When we got to our camp, he told me that something a little weird had happened. He said that when he was setting things up, another truck had pulled up on him and just stopped and watched him for a minute. He said he started to walk over to talk to the driver, but it backed out of the camp area and took off. This kind of spooked me, but we decided it was probably someone who also liked our spot and realized he was setting up camp and not taking it down, and they were just disappointed. I should mention that we were clearly naive. So we went about our business and eventually went to bed around midnight. I am a deep sleeper. Around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to my boyfriend whispering directly in my ear to wake up but not say a word. I could hear a larger engine vehicle close by. I wasn't too afraid, but then I heard a car door creak open and footsteps approaching steadily but slowly. All the hairs on my body stood up. We were quiet and I remember silently praying. The person circled our tent, then walked off, sat in their truck for a while, and then left. Although my boyfriend wanted to stay, I convinced him that we should leave and come back in the day with friends to take down camp, as I was convinced that we didn't need to be there. We left all of our stuff. When we came back the next day to take everything down, we unzipped our tent and found that my inner wares that I had left in my bag had been laid out on my sleeping bag as if they were placed there to represent my body. It was so creepy. To this day, I think something horrific would have happened if we had stayed there. I still love to camp, but now only go to authorized camping zones. Story 29. On October 3rd, my area in Arizona had one of its bad dust storms, or haboobs. My husband and I were on the 202 driving home from his work, coming up to Levine. We had zero visibility, so we got off on Dobbins, which is a small 2-lane, country-like road. We did the whole pullover thing they tell you to do on the news. We were sitting there, and the car was rocking and shaking in the wind. We still couldn't see past the hood of our car. Suddenly, there was a human shape flying toward our car. It hit the roof, and we heard scraping sounds as it slid across. We were terrified. We were debating if it was a person and unsure if 60+. Mile-per-hour wind could fling someone or not. My husband double-masked to keep dirt out and got out of the car to check and make sure it wasn't a body. It turned out someone had lost Halloween decorations. It was a life-size zombie-looking thing. For a moment, though, we thought a body had been flung at us. Story 30. I have told these stories to friends many times, but I have never written them down. I will preface this by saying that I am a non-religious skeptic who does not believe in the supernatural, but I have no explanation for these events. I will try to keep this terse, because it was actually a series of events. They all occurred when I moved with my then legal guardian into a home in the California Bay Area many years ago. The first thing we noticed was that one of the rooms in the rear of the house was much colder than the rest of the house, to the point that it was constantly remarked upon. My room was directly across the hall from this cold room, which was set up for my guardian's son. My guardian's son would visit often. He was young, around 6 or 7. When he would visit, he would sometimes be tired and cranky in the mornings. And when asked why, he would say, "I can't sleep because the man watches me at night." Fast forward some months. I woke in the middle of the night in my room with the certainty that someone was in there with me, staring at me. My heart was absolutely pounding. I tried not to move or breathe or do anything that would give away that I was there. Eventually the feeling passed and I was able to sleep. Months later, I was in the kitchen cooking a Hot Pocket or something in the microwave. I remember taking my food out, turning around with the saucer in my hand, and seeing in front of me a shadowy mass, right in front of me. Just a non-distinct shadowy shape that should not have been there, hovering in the air. I had enough time to register it before it moved directly toward me, fast. I flinched hard, dropped my plate, and turned and ran out of the room. I often think about writing a letter to that address to ask the current inhabitants if they have experienced anything strange. Story 31. A few weeks ago, I was asleep in my apartment. I have 4 roommates, and one of them must have forgotten to lock the door. I woke up at 4 a.m. for no clear reason and saw an absolutely massive 6'3" figure standing in my doorway, messing with the mic on my mic stand. I processed it quickly and realized it was not one of my roommates. Fight or flight kicked in because I was cornered in my room. I am a 19-year-old guy, fairly tall but not huge. I stood up, we locked eyes, and I just ran at him, yelling for him to get out of my house. I did not even think about it. My body just moved. He ran out, I locked the door behind him, called the cops to file a report, and then went back to bed because I had an 8 a.m. class. Shout out to my roommates for being high as hell and leaving the door unlocked. I am grateful it was not worse, but that was one of those we almost died situations. Like, great. Of course, I am the 1% this happens to. Story 32, I checked into my hotel room for a work trip, ordered room service, ate, watched a little TV, turned out the light pretty early because I had a big presentation in the morning, went to sleep immediately. I generally sleep quite soundly, and my family jokes that I'd sleep through a tornado. I'm often asked, what about that storm last night? What storm? I slept through it. At some point I woke up, thinking I heard the door open and shut, and there's light briefly in the room. I turn over, still mostly asleep, thinking it's the door across the hall or next door, and maybe headlights coming in through the window. But then I hear rustling in the room, and the other bed creaking a little bit. I sit bolt upright and switch on the light. There's a guy sitting on the edge of the other bed, slipping off his shoes. Somehow, the front desk checked him into my same room and activated his card key. Never been so freaked out in my life, but he was just as scared as I was. I always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up, and in the morning had a strange guy asleep in the next bed. Story 33. Senior year in high school, one guy I knew decided we needed to head into NYC to find fake IDs. Most of the group were lifelong suburban kids, but I grew up in the city, so had a little more street smarts than the rest. So we're walking around, one kid in charge, apparently thinking he's going to find a magical fake ID store somewhere. At some point, some guy starts talking to him, and he says, "This guy knows where we can get them. Let's go." I knew this was a horrible idea, but followed the group. I start noticing more guys coming out of nowhere, basically surrounding us. My friends were oblivious to this, but I knew this was a bad situation. At this point, a real jumpy guy slides up next to me and says, "Yo, they said you need ID." At this point, I wanted out and just said, "Nah man, I'm good. I'm just along for the ride." That pissed him off. He grabbed my arm, lifted his shirt to show me a huge knife shoved in his waistband, and said, "Give me $1 for wasting my time, or I'll gut you like a fish." I'm like, okay, fair deal. I handed him $1 and he walked away. At that point, we were walking past a subway stop and I yelled, "Subway, now!" and ran down the stairs. Eventually, everyone followed. We got on the train and proceeded to argue for 20 minutes about whether we were all going to get led to some basement to get mugged and killed, or if we were actually going to get fake IDs. Story 34. One year in the ocean at a beach trip with my family, I had watched an episode of Shark Week the night before I entered the water. I was in 4 or 5 feet of water at the most, and vividly remembered the Shark Week television program from the night before, which stated, "Do not splash or a shark will be attracted to you," specifically frantic splashing like a fish would make in distress. I was the only one in the water. The skies were cloud covered, and I started splashing, bored. I thought, maybe a shark will come, like a fool. I did this for a good 10 minutes. I was past the breaking waves. Over the next wave, I could see the shore and my family on the beach. My mother waved to me and yelled for me to come back in. I dismissed her. Another minute went by. I splashed like a fish. I heard her voice a second time from the shore. I was still out a good 30 yards as I was swimming on the east coast, and I continued to splash. She yelled for me to come in. She looked up from her book again. I dismissed her. I began splashing again, like a fool. She yelled another time, a third and final time. A soft, calm yell, not an order, but a request. She requested I come in from the water with a gentle wave, from her seat of safety on the beach. For some reason this time, I listened to her. I mean really listened instead of just hearing. I decided on my own accord to come back to shore. There were no real waves to surf, nor did I have a surfboard anyway. I began to swim back to shore, My feet already touched the sandy bottom, so only the pull of the riptide worked against me as I made my way into shallow water. After a 10-minute walk and a swim back to shore, I walked out of the water with one last splash. Tired, I made my way to her chair, where my mom was reading a book. I said, "Why did you call me in?" She looked up from reading her book for a moment. "I didn't," she said with a curious look. I sort of smiled, confused. I was so sure she did. I shrugged her off and looked back to the ocean. I was ready to go back in and continue my swim. I froze when my eyes met the ocean. In the exact spot I was splashing and swimming, past the breaking waves, were 3 large sharks, thrashing about. From the dorsal fin to the tail fin, the biggest shark had to have been 8 feet long, the other 2 at least 6 feet long. I was horrified. If I was still in the water, I would have been torn to pieces by the 3 sharks. I pointed, and my mom and the rest of the family saw the sharks. No one else went into the water again that day. I sometimes wonder if the 8-foot shark was really 10 feet long. It is hard to tell from the beach. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.